So for the last couple months in particular, I've been looking really hard at the data um, surrounding, and this is primarily for throwing, overhand throwing patterns, but I'm sure it's going to hold true for swinging patterns as well. But I've been looking deeply into the relationships that create good segmental relationship or good segmental coordination, especially between the pelvis and the upper thoracic or the upper torso, and that relative to the throwing arm and the patterns that we're seeing in the throwing arm. And what I've been seeing, and this is just a really short little teaser presentation of some stuff I'm looking at. I'm going to create a series of presentations as I look deeper and pull up more data. But I'll show you what I've been finding, and this is a pretty good example of the kind of information I'd like to pull together. So one of the things that I'm finding that is absolutely critical for both pelvic thoracic relationship as well as thoracic arm, or really pelvic thoracic arm relationship, is lead side or stride leg internal rotation, or internal external rotation, but primarily the ability to move into internal rotation. And what I'm finding is it's not a range of motion thing. But what it is, it's a dynamic thing, and it's articulation thing. It's really a pelvic hip joint dissociation thing to some degree, and that would be the articulation, where the athlete's ability to create a foundation of both acceleration and then stability by controlling that pelvic lead hip joint, especially in the internal rotation, internal external rotation range of motion, is absolutely critical. So I'm going to show you a little bit of data about what I'm talking about here. So the first thing is, here is a overhand throw pattern. You'll see that what I've put here, I've marked off. So you've got your hip segment rotational speed and your upper thoracic or shoulder segment rotational speed. The first line is where you start to initiate the lower body acceleration. And that first line, what it shows is initially you've got some stability, 5 to 10 degrees of external rotation, actually, because of the way that the pelvis is rotated. But it's pretty neutral. As soon as you start to accelerate into counterclockwise, this would be a right-handed throw, a counterclockwise pelvic rotation, you'll see a sharp turn into internal rotation. At the point of maximal rotational acceleration of the pelvis, that would be here at frame 73. So you have your hip or your pelvic transverse rotation, peak speed occurring at 73. This is where you actually start to go into actual internal rotation. And this is also where you're going to create your primary stretch dynamic of the transverse musculature of the torso, obliques, internal. So that's sort of that torso rotational sling. Okay, so that's critical. And so what's fueling that and what's creating a good pattern there is the ability to stabilize the lead side such that the pelvis rotates in the transverse plane into a strong, stable lead side, which is causing an internal rotation. Okay, so now you can see as I reach my peak rotational speed here around 85, I'm still continuing to internally rotate all the way to this point here. Okay, and what I want to show you is the connection is the strong lead side. Over here, you look at the knee flexion, you'll see that here at 73, where I'm having my greatest hip acceleration and loading the torso, you see the gap building between the pelvis and the torso, is also where I'm most stable with my lead knee, and typically that lead knee is going to be right around 45 degrees of knee flexion. Okay, so that's also very critical to show that the lead side has a huge impact on what's going on with the lead hip. The lead side being mostly knee flexion, and that having a relationship to the foot contact, a solid foot contact, and then you see what happens there in terms of pelvic rotation, and then most importantly, the ability to internally rotate. So then as you carry on, and you finally peak out your torso and then decelerate your torso, you'll see peaking torso here at about 90, 91. You'll see you're still internally rotating. So you'll see that that internal rotation occurs all the way here to frame roughly 99. So let's take a look at what that means. So what happens is that you're going to see, if we look at the accelerations of the two, you're going to have your peak hip acceleration here, and as you now start to slow down, you're going to get the beginnings of a torso acceleration. Once you actually get into a sharp torso deceleration is where you're going to get your maximal torso or upper thoracic acceleration. So as your pelvic decelerates, you get your peak output. Right as you go into decel, you get your peak, not speed, but acceleration of the torso. Both then continue, now both are decelerating to a point of deceleration here, where they both decelerate at their maximum value almost on top of each other. And this is occurring right here, where we are now beginning arm accelerations. Okay, so this is where we have those peak decels, and here, so what's so interesting, okay, and those peak decels are a function of continued internal rotation into the lead hip and control. Once you stop the internal rotation and just stabilize, that's that point right here, that arrow. That's where we get the greatest amount of, or the initiation of internal rotation fling to maximal point where we're releasing the implement or the ball or the football or whoever with the overhand throw. So do you see what I'm saying here is one of the correlating and most important factors to all these little mechanisms that go into creating distal end speed for an overhand throw are intimately related to lead hip internal rotation, and the relationship of that relative to good lead side stability and then controlled knee extension. So, but the key here, I'm finding over and over again, is that internal rotation, I thought, certainly impacted pelvic rotation or pelvic rotational acceleration and speed, certainly. But as I'm looking deeper, it has a very dramatic impact on then thoracic acceleration, and it has a very dramatic impact on both pelvic and thoracic deceleration, which has a dramatic impact on the arm dynamic and distal end acceleration to the point of release. So I'm going to look more deeply into this, but your ability to stabilize the lead leg and create articulation at the joint of the hip and the pelvis, and the dissociation or the independent control of pelvic transverse rotation and stabilized lead side, which is creating an internal rotation, is absolutely critical for optimal segmental relationships that go well beyond the immediate point where you would think they're having an impact all the way to the extremity. So we're finding that this lower body pattern, this pelvic lead hip pattern of internal external rotation, mostly internal rotation obviously, has a dramatic impact on the stuff most immediate to it, but also has a dramatic impact on stuff that is most distal to this entire pattern, which I find incredibly enlightening and also incredibly important and critical really for the next level of understanding in creating training mechanism to enhance a player's ability to articulate and use that articulation to drive not only upper thoracic, the next chain, the next segment in chain, but all the way out to the most distal acceleration of the arm, all the way through to the point of release.